Good morning everybody, I'm the Bear Bow Brummie. Today I'm asking the question, what happens if I shoot a bow that's completely the wrong length for me? First, this is my 66-inch win and win. And this one is one of the youth trainer bows from my club. It's only a 54-inch. It's a big difference. What happens? The answer is absolutely nothing. I've been the Bear Bow Brummie. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. Now hold on a minute, sunshine. There's much more to bow length than that little demonstration you've just seen. Yes, it is true that you can shoot any length of bow you really want. If you look at the likes of Asiatic bows and hunting bows, they're all quite small and the size differences don't make a massive amount of difference to them. But you're missing the point. The point is, in the case of Olympic style recurve bows, they come in various lengths for good reason. The idea is to try and match the length of your bow to something that best suits your shooting style and your draw length. While we're on the subject of draw length, it's why I did the previous video on draw length first. Let's dispel a myth that I tend to hear quite a bit. I don't really know why people say this. I've even heard other coaches say exactly the same thing, and I really don't understand it. You'll hear people say, oh yes, if you're 6'2", you'll want a 70-inch bow. Or, if you're only 14 years of age, we'll give you one of these youth bows. That's not true. Your bow length is determined by one thing and one thing only, and that's your draw length. Regardless of your age, regardless of your size, it's all about how far apart your hands are at full draw. Doesn't matter whether you're 14 years of age, doesn't matter whether you're 7 feet tall. It depends on the distance of your draw length. You can have tall people who have got quite short arms. You can have short people who've got really long arms. Therefore, you suit the bow to their draw length, not to their age or their size. I get quite angry with people when they say, you're only 14, you just need a kid's bow. That's not true. And it makes me angry because they don't really quite understand. If ever somebody says to you something like that, walk away from them. They don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, now I've got that off my chest, let's talk about sorting out the best bow length for you. Okay, let's start with the basics. Your Olympic takedown recurve bow comes in 3 pieces, as you probably know. You have the riser in the centre, upper and lower limbs either side. Now the riser itself, they come in various sizes. They range from a 17-inch riser right up to a 27-inch riser. And the limbs themselves come in 3 different lengths, a short, a medium and a long. So you can see very quickly you get a huge variation in size of bow you can use. All you've got to do is find the right one for you. On my whiteboard back here, I've written right from a 17-inch riser all the way up to a 27-inch riser, the various lengths that you can make up from those particular mixtures of limbs and risers. The one thing I will say is the 17-inch riser and the 27-inch riser are tending to get quite rare these days. I think the manufacturers are slowly phasing them out because there simply isn't really a market for them. People tend to go for the slightly bigger riser, or in the case of the 27, they don't really need the 70. What can you make a 72-inch bow? They don't really need it. So therefore, there isn't really the market. So the manufacturers are tending to restrict them. If you're buying a riser, depending on which model, the vast majority of adults will use a 25-inch riser, which is by far the most common. Not too many other manufacturers will make the same riser in different sizes. They tend to do 2 or 3 different sizes, but they won't do them all in one particular type of riser. You might have to search to find the riser you want in the size you want. Now, helpfully, some archery retailers or manufacturers have issued a guide that equates draw length to bow size. I've written them all down on my whiteboard here. Let's quickly go through them. Let's start with right at the top. Get it straight, here we are. If your draw length is between 14 and 16 inches, you will need a 48-inch bow. If your draw length is 17 to 20 inches, you'll need a 54-inch bow. If your draw length is 20 to 22, it's a 58. 22 to 24, you'll need a 62 bow. A 24-inch draw length to a 26-inch draw length, you'll need a 64 to a 66-inch bow. A 26 to a 28-inch draw requires a 66 to a 68-inch bow. A 28 to a 30 needs a 68 or a 70-inch bow. And if you have a draw length of 31 inches or longer, you'll want a 70 or a 72-inch bow. Now, these figures are fine, except they are only a guide, because you may be dead right for a 66-inch bow, but you might not be comfortable with a shorter bow like that. You might want a longer bow, because longer bows shoot differently to a shorter bow. And I'll go into that in a second. Now, I'll leave my board up there, so if you want to pause the video and zoom in on it to have a closer look, you can do. But let's just talk about choosing a particular bow. The difference is, if you choose a long bow, let's say a 68 or a 70, the thing with long bows is they do tend to be very forgiving, because they're a little bit softer. Because the string is longer, the bow is longer, they tend to be a little bit more forgiving for you, which means if your release isn't perfect, you'll get away with it to a certain extent, because the bow is softer feel and accepts a bad shot better than a short one. The issue with long bows is that arrows come out slower. It's just a fact, especially if you have a draw that's not fully compatible with a long bow. The arrow will come out slowly, not at the speed it really should do, but that works to your advantage to a certain extent, because, as I say, if your form isn't perfect, the longer bow will compensate to a certain extent for that and make it a little bit easier for you to hit accurately. Whereas if you choose a shorter bow, which is the way I went because I like a shorter bow, they are much, much more aggressive, i.e. the arrows come off a lot quicker, but your form has to be very, very good, because the slightest difference in your release or your anchor point, or even the way you just open your hand, can affect the arrow through a short bow much, much more, which means your miss will be much bigger than it would have been if you shoot a longer bow. That's the kind of compromise you may have to make. Okay, so hopefully you may have made a decision now to roughly what size bow you want. You may have narrowed it down to a couple of sizes, a slightly longer one, a slightly shorter one. You saw from that illustration I made that some bow you can have like a 66 to a 68. Do you choose the 66 or do you choose a 68? Well, there are some things you need to consider with both of those. Let's start with the longer one. I've done another little drawing here that gives you an idea of the difference between using a longer bow and using a shorter bow. Let's start with the longer one. You can see that what I've done is I've drawn the anchor points for your string at either end, and then your string angle. The draw length on both of these is exactly the same, and you can see that the angle of the string just there is not quite long enough for the longer bow, which means, as I said before, that what will happen is you won't quite get the power that the bow is capable of, because you simply aren't drawing it back quite far enough. That's because it's the way you're built. You don't draw that far, so you have to compromise a little bit. But on the upside, the bow will be a little bit softer and a little bit easier to shoot than a shorter one. That's a longer bow. A shorter bow has different issues. It depends what you like. The shorter bow, which is just there, what I've done is the draw length on both of these is exactly the same. All I've done is shorten that line to simulate a shorter bow. And you can see that the angle of the string is much more acute. This creates two problems. Your first problem is a thing called stacking. If you've never heard of stacking before, I shall quickly demonstrate it. Your string is attached up there and it comes straight down. When you first pull your bow back, like that, what happens is the string pulls the tip of the limb down rather than backwards. Watch. So it pulls it down. You see? As that string gets further away, i.e. when this starts to happen, when it comes right out there, what happens is that tip wants to go in that direction rather than in that direction. And that's called stacking, because what happens is the bow limb doesn't want to do that. It wants to bend that way and not that way. And then that happens, then the poundage builds up very, very quickly and the bow becomes uncomfortable and difficult to shoot. That's your first issue. You want to avoid that as much as you possibly can. Your second issue comes down to the angle of the string where you're gripping it there. You can get a thing called finger pinch. Now, finger pinch will be, just get an arrow. Finger pinch is when, and I can demonstrate this with my practice device, the angle of the string becomes so acute, like this is obviously, like that when your three fingers are on the string like that, as you pull back, it starts to collapse your fingers in on one another, something like that. Now, a strong archer can withstand it and hold the fingers outright, and it's not a massive issue. But certainly as a beginner, it becomes a problem that your fingers start to collapse in on each other because of the acute angle of the string like this. And what happens is, once you're holding your arrow like this, if you're shooting Mediterranean, is a really good example of it. As you do this, what happens is your first two fingers here, they tend to close around the arrow, and you pinch on the arrow, and then when you release, that creates an effect on the arrow and it can throw it offline. What happens if you shoot 3 under, it's slightly different. Because the arrow sits on the top, what happens is you get a really weird angle through the arrow like that, which means the knock doesn't sit on the string quite well, and it can possibly sometimes slip off, and because your fingers are being pushed together, you can push the arrow off the string. That's called finger pinch. That's another thing you can avoid. As I say, stronger archers tend to be a little bit better at withholding it from doing that because they've got stronger hands. As a beginner, it's a difficult thing to try and control, and you really want to try and control everything you possibly can in archery. So there's your two problems with your shorter or your longer bow. And those are the things you have to contemplate once you're sorting your bow out. The best option to do is to try both sizes and see which one you're more comfortable with. That's the answer. Okay, so that's my views on choosing the right bow to suit your draw length. As I said again, and I've said many times in this video, it's a personal choice issue. You know, you shoot what you're comfortable with. That's the answer. That's the real answer to the whole thing. Shoot what you're good at. Shoot what you're comfortable with. Anyway, have fun sorting out your bow size. In the next video, we're going to go along with the draw length issues we're talking about. I'm going to do a video on arrow length. So once you've got your bow length sorted, you need to then organise some arrows to go with your new bow. So we'll be doing that in the next video. I've been the Barebow Brummie. Thank you for viewing. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, click down here somewhere. If you like the channel, click down here somewhere. Please, if you've got anything to say, send me a comment. I'll be happy to reply. Bye bye.